All right, let's get started. Welcome back to the Open Canopy webinar series where we are exploring the ecology and management of eastern woodland ecosystems. My name is Kyle Brazel. I'm the director of the Central Hardwoods Joint Venture and a lover of healthy woodlands and wildlife populations, in particular birds. So I'm super excited for this topic today. In addition to the Central Hardwoods Joint Venture, this webinar series is brought to you by the American Bird Conservancy and the White Oak Initiative. So we're excited about that. Many of you attended the Open Canopy workshop that we had this past September, and you know that we didn't have much material covering the management of working lands. In other words, those properties where profit is a consideration in addition to conservation. And that's something that we wanted to address with our first couple of webinars. And we feel this is an important topic because there are a lot of landowners out there who either need or just want to make some money off their forest resources, but that doesn't mean that they don't also want to provide some conservation benefits. And we want to make sure that we provide information about how to provide guidance to those landowners that want to do a little bit of both. And Mike Demchik is here today to talk to us about how to do just that. And just a reminder that the goal of Open Canopy as a whole is to highlight the value, the historical extent, and the decline of these open canopy systems, specifically, our woodlands and savannas in the eastern U.S., and to elevate what we consider the urgent need for their restoration and management, excuse me, to the forefront of the conservation community because we don't feel that it's getting the attention that it both needs and deserves, given what it provides in terms of biodiversity, economics, all of the above. So we hope that this series will both stimulate and empower the viewers to collectively take action towards their restoration and management. A little bit of quick housekeeping. Yes, your microphones and cameras are disabled. That's not our favorite feature of Zoom webinar, but it is what it is. But rest assured, we want to hear from you. So please type your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will get to them at the end of Mike's presentation. And also, if there's limited time and there's a lot of questions, make sure that you upvote those questions that you most want to hear Mike answer, and we'll make sure that we get to those questions with the most votes first. Next, I've gotten a number of emails about this. We are posting the recordings of these webinars on the brand new Central Hardwoods Joint Venture YouTube page. And that is what the QR link there at the bottom right of the screen goes to, is the CHJV YouTube page. So feel free to follow that QR code there and send anyone who's not able to attend to watch the webinars there. Also, it's pretty simple to just Google Central Hardwoods Joint Venture and YouTube and get there as well. Next, this webinar is approved for the Society of American Foresters and the Wildlife Society Continuing Education credits. And in particular, if you need SAF credit, make sure you record your attendance using using the link in the QR code, which will be provided at the end of the presentation to make sure you fill out the Microsoft form. Also, if that doesn't work for you, if you keep your browser open at the end of the webinar, in other words, don't close out before I close out the webinar, it should automatically take you to that form. And if you still have problems, just remember Tommy Gunn's email address there, and just email Tommy and say you need credit for this, and we'll make sure that you get that credit. No problem. With that, it is time to introduce our speaker for today, Mike Demchik. Mike is a professor of forestry at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, where he teaches a range of courses in forestry and restoration. His research is wide-ranging, but with a focus on applied silviculture, log quality and defects, and using timber sales to create wildlife habitat elements. He is obsessed with birds and bird habitat and use the prescribed fire as a management tool. When he is not working for the university, he's usually marking timber or running a chainsaw. In short, I think this makes Mike the perfect person to address this topic. So with that, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll stop sharing so you can. Where does it allow me to stop sharing? There we go.
And I always ask the same question, is this projecting correctly?
You're good, Mike, if you can still hear me.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to talk about open canopy management using commercial timber sales. And I'm going to kind of obsess on the portion of this, which is doing this commercially. And we're going to start with a basic tenet, and I'm going to minimize this, the basic tenet of forest management. So when we work with stocking charts, this is a tool used extensively, particularly in the eastern part of the United States. And I love it. So I want to start in by saying I love the tool. They were developed by Gingrich back in the 60s and 70s, but it's a tool that has moved into almost a religion. And so beeline is the lowest level of full stocking. So that's the point at which the crowns can fully occupy the site. So that is a level of stocking where the canopy is fully closed or potentially fully closed. C line is a point where you can get to beeline in 10 years. This has been interpreted in Wisconsin as basically thin to beeline. So you start somewhere above beeline, beyond, the place of full thought stocking and then to beeline. I'm actually going to kind of focus on why I think that is actually potentially a trigger point for thinning. It's different than where a target, and we'll spend a little more time talking about that. So this is working with red pine. So this red pine stand that you see with the numbers for it, quadratic mean diameter. So A line for 5-inch quadratic mean diameter is 1,104 trees. B line is 472. A very common stand density that was planted to in Wisconsin when I first came here was 1,000 trees per acre. In some cases, they planted as high as 1,800 trees an acre. The problem with this is under current market conditions, what I consider to be like a stand that you can actually enter commercially, one that stands on its own, not duct taped to some other bigger sale. 5 inches is not really valid for entering that stand. As soon as you hit 6 inches, you have already gotten to where you have more trees than the A line. You're in a condition where you're going to start having density dependent mortality or reduced tree health. And what I would suggest is that planting at a lower initial density, if I planted at like 600 an acre as an example, I can hold those trees um, up to 7 or 8 inches in diameter before I absolutely have to thin them. And at that point, I'm getting what's called a bolt in this part of the country. Rest of the country, they might call it a chip and saw. And that translates to lower initial planting density, more vigorous trees, and they get to those sizes faster. But also at the first entry, you have larger product class. So if I look at these two trees, and I always look terrible, I'd been running saw all day in that photo. So I always look terrible in these. If you look at those two trees, they're the same age. They're actually in the same stand. They're a different side of the property. So that's property that I own, and I functionally started thinning this years ago on the side that you see me standing to the bigger tree, the one on the left. That tree got fully released young and also got pruned young. The one on the right got thinned and pruned later, but the thing is, it was the further along in the property. It took me longer to get there. I cut so much on other people's properties, and I'm the university property manager here, so I also cut on a lot of our properties, that I only cut on mine when I'm having, it's a recreational thing or I need a mental break or something. So I don't quite get enough time to get what I want done in a timely manner. Those two trees are the same age. The one was thinned early. You can look around, you can see very open conditions in that stand and light getting to the ground. They just occupy space differently. That plays through time pretty significantly. So these are on the large end of the log. So they're cookies we took off after the trees were dropped, so we didn't end up taking them at DBH. The first two are from the same stand. I thinned it at 27 years. The first tree was free to grow on two sides. By happenstance, its neighbors on both sides died. The next tree had all four of its neighbors in place. The one on the left made it to 13.1 inches on the large end of the log in 27 years. The next one made it to 8 inches. The one on the right was originally planted at a 4 by 6 spacing and was not thinned for 57 years. That's when we first thinned it. Those trees averaged 7 or 8 inches in DBH, and they had 7 or 8 sticks, 100-inch sticks of pulp in them. They didn't taper, they had almost no crown. So the impact of this is essentially less trees equals faster growing, more vigorous trees. Looking at this in pulp piles. So that first pulp pile is the pulp pile, one of the pulp piles generated from the 27-year-old stand you just saw. That particular pulp pile, have been running for years chainsaw certifications here. I've certified at this point 1,434 people, and I was literally running a chainsaw certification training, the indoor part, right prior to this webinar. So we cut those trees and we made pulp out of them. We stacked them for transport. That's the size that 27-year-old stand, that's the average size of the pulp. Compare that to the 30-year-old stand below. They're on the same soil type. The difference is that stand below was planted at 390 trees an acre, and it was planted on a property where this was more of a wildlife focus originally. They are just absolute beasts of trees compared to the ones in the upper folk. So my take on this is a little different on these stocking charts. You can totally work within that framework where you're thinning to a beeline, and that's not a bad goal. However, on many sites under many goals, beeline can actually be looked at as a trigger point to thin. Once the stand is actually grown to beeline, the crowns are now fully stocked. We can look at that as the trigger point and actually decide to thin lower than that if we have goals where we're trying to get more light to the ground or we want very vigorous trees or fast growing trees. I would say in general, most forests do better with fewer trees in them. I think that overstocking is a problem. The first commercial entry in many states is way too late in the rotation for those sites. And I think we blame deer in many settings where our silviculture makes it improbable that we will get regeneration. We have not cut the stands heavy enough. We have not set up the preconditions that would allow the sites to regenerate. And then we act surprised when it doesn't work. I think in many cases, if we get more light to the ground, we have more forage, and more forage is more likely to overwhelm the deer. And it also, because many parcels are owned with a goal of generating forage, that is a good thing. So I'm going to spend a lot of this time talking about irregular shelterwood. And I'm going to use the classification system that Raymond et al. Came up with. And for those that haven't read this article, this is a really good article. You should consider looking it up. They classified these irregular shelterwoods into three classes: expanding gap irregular shelterwood, continuous cover irregular shelterwood, and extended irregular shelterwood. Now, this is one of my favorite systems, and I have been experimenting with this since, I'll say, like probably about 1995. That's about when I started on it. And expanding gap irregular shelterwood is one of my favorites. So they'll start with this stand. So we cut this stand. This is in Adams County, Wisconsin, on a glacial lake sand. And it did not have, it had like one tiny pocket of white pine. It had like two trees in one area, and all the rest of it was red pine. That was very normal in that part of the state. The plantations were exclusively one species. In other parts of the state, we actually had some white pine in them to allow for regeneration. So we cut the holes in the stand, and that's what the ground condition looked like. And we planted them to white pines and oaks. So this is what the pockets look like after dry down in the first year. Push it through time, 2012. So I want you to look at that little oak tree. He was visible in that previous photo, but he's tiny. 2015, that's my daughter for scale. That's that same oak tree. It's starting to be a going concern. And if you notice in the background, that stand was thinned a second time in 2015. So it's more open now and more pockets were added. That's my wife in 2019, and that's that oak. And then that's my graduate student in 2021. So following this through from the original cut and planting till now, I have actually grown a seed source. Particularly, you see some natural red pine behind him that regenerated from the seed from the crown. White pine in there producing seed, and these oaks. And the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife did some drone footage for me of these sites, so we can actually kind of look at this from the air. So this was shot in 2020. And these are what those pockets look in 2020. And the thing to notice, if you look on the ground in the areas surrounding these pockets, the thing you're going to see are these adorable little baby pine trees that have expanded. Essentially, these white pine have gotten large enough now that they are throwing seed, and those seed have actually started as baby white pine. And with that second thinning and more pockets added, we now have a basically a sea of little baby white pine. We can do whatever we want with the overstory now. And so, impact on this. We can do this with hardwood too. I talked on pine there because in Wisconsin, pine is our system that is, we even age manage pine here generally. This is a northern hardwood stand with some oak in it. This is pre-harvest pocket, post-harvest pocket. So we created a gap over top of this. My daughter and I marked this site and some logging damage in there, but plenty of trees to spill that spot. This is another spot. There was big tooth aspen in the center of it. This photo is a little distorting because it's about an acre sized pocket that was cut with it was either two or three big tooth in the center of it. They resprouted, but they've slightly been overwhelmed by deer. That was actually intentional. The idea was to get the baby sprouts from the root sprouts on the big tooth aspen to set. And this year we came in and actually cut this pocket wider. So all of the pine you see in the back, then the background right is now gone. And that is the south direction. So now we have south light penetration in there. That whole pocket is going to grow to aspen. This is a private landowner parcel that my business set up. And the thing you'd see, there's a deer stand there. There were aspen on this hillside. You can see the light penetration to the stand behind it. This is facing south. Essentially, we're getting aspen regeneration in this pocket, really good for forage. And what's neat about this is we can expand this gap with the next harvest. So presuppose I'm the forester doing the next harvest on this. The area you see in the background where we have light penetration is going to have seedlings coming in underneath it. That's going to get cut next, and we can perpetually increase the size of this. Another pocket, same idea. This is photoed facing north. What you see is a patch selection. It's about a half acre to an acre on this particular site. And then we cut the area to the north more open so that we get the light penetration from the south into it. We'll get our seedlings on the site. And when we do our next stand entry, we'll pull the top off of that part to the north. Now, I don't want to give you the idea the system's perfect. As a matter of fact, it comes in with some challenges. The most notable is trying to get the loggers not to destroy the regeneration of the gaps. Those gaps look entirely too much like places to turn the forwarder around. You need the right logger to work with it, and the highest bid on a site may not be that person. And to quote the forester who complained about the site that I was doing in Adams County there a number of years ago, I am making complexity out of simplicity. Management of red pine is one of our simplest systems. We go into it, row thin it, then we go in and do marked thinning for 2 or 3 times, 4 times, and then we pull the top off. That is pretty simple silviculture. Any of the stuff I'm talking about makes complexity in that system. Now, I like that complexity because I like wildlife, but there are foresters who do not actually like that. So that's system one. System 2, continuous cover regular shelterwood. This one's where you're working with multiple cohorts in a stand. And the way I like to think about this is it's kind of like uneven age management, but your regeneration you're targeting can also be mid tolerant, things like your oaks. My favorite photo of this. And so this site's been logged a second time since this photo was taken. So this is stage 1. The way to look at this, background left, aspen coppice. I had some aspen there. We cut that. It's resprouting. Background right, conventional shelterwood getting light to the ground. Foreground right, prep cut for a shelterwood. I removed the undesirable seed sources there. Left side, that is a thinning. Add 15 years. My aspen in the background is 15 years old. My shelterwood's ready to have the top pulled off of it in the background right. Foreground right is ready to have a shelterwood. Foreground left's ready to be thinned. Add 15 more years. My aspen's 30 years old. The stuff where the old shelterwood was 15. The stuff where the current is ready to have top pulled off. The pine's ready to be shelterwooded. Add 15 more years. 45-year-old aspen, possibly ready to harvest. 30-year-old regeneration under the oak in the back. 15-year-old in the right, shelterwood ready to have the top pulled off. And what's nice about this is you can perpetually do this till the end of time. It's an amazing system. It has immense wildlife value. We're mimicking windstorms in this. This is the 2019 windstorm. That's a significant root wad. That 2019 windstorm created a heck of a lot of work for me. I was actually running continuous timber sales on different sites. So just site after site after site for almost 2 complete years after it to clean up the mess. However, it allowed me to do stuff that socially I probably could not have done on those sites. It opened holes in stands that socially probably you could not have. And we're mimicking that with much of our harvest here. This is a regular shelterwood condition. And I really want to emphasize we generate a lot of wood in this. This is not, I mean, it's got an element of being touchy-feely forestry, but the other side of this is a productive system. And, this is the roadside log deck that I did on one of these sites. This is not small volume production. We had a lot of wood coming off of these sites. And so looking across the site, this is one portion of it, which was logged in a basic open shelterwood condition where we had group shelterwood, where we maintained groups and individual trees reserved, where we had big openings. And then if you look in the background, areas that we just thinned. The visual on part of it, fairly open system, patches of trees, individual reserve trees, openings, and not just specific to hardwood. If I look at what conventional red pine management is within the lake states, this is not it. It is conventional management is row thin, 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 and then take the top off. This ends up looking profoundly different. It is a more complex system. It's more difficult for the loggers to navigate. However, it is a biologically valid system. This was some of, when I was doing this earlier on in Wisconsin, this was some of the stuff that I got pushback on. Another site, same idea. This is Camp Glacier Hollow YMCA camp. So 2019 windstorm I mentioned earlier, they had significant damage at that facility. Salvage logger was in there working on it. We did a restoration plan for the property, worked with the CEO and the site manager. I did a restoration plan. We marked it. We marked the oak on top of the hillside as an irregular shelterwood. And this was a bird-focused restoration project, commercially carried out. The background is a thinning. The foreground is a shelterwood. And if you turn around, that's a pocket cut behind it that had some oak wood in it. So it was an obvious location for it. Our Tree Haven facility. This is aspen coppice in the open areas with pine reserve trees. This is part of our grouse demonstration unit, essentially generating grouse habitat on the sites. You have areas with long-term reserves. These are going to be grown to advanced ages. And then you have aspen coppice in foreground. Just another photo of it. The arrangement on the site is anywhere from individual reserve trees to clusters. This can be done in a lot of settings. So upper right's pine stand that I marked, um, let's say 5 years ago, at some point in the moderate recent past. It was thinned first, so it had a first thinning. In the past, this was second thinning. I did variable density harvest within it. So this was an even age stand, but I am diversifying the light conditions on it so that I can then start adding structure to the site. We have openings in it, we have lower density areas, and then we have conventional thinning. And as you look across it, you can see those differences. And, the background left, for example, is pretty open. Long term, the site's now easier to manage and it'll be converting to a mix of species. Lower left, same thing, managing where we are keeping reserve trees, where we are thinning in places where we have the quality and where we have openings to allow light to the ground, high structural diversity. Next system, extended or regular shelter wood. So this one's one that I both like, but I also have a little bit of concerns on. The benefits of it are easy. You create two cohort stands, they work well for some species. This is one of my favorite systems for hard maple management. In Wisconsin, we have a high enough deer pressure in many counties that I do not feel like uneven age management has been practiced successfully. We do not get enough light to the ground in that setting to actually get regeneration. In these conditions where we do long-term two cohort management, we can cut the original cohort hard enough that we may actually get enough light to the ground to push the regeneration past the deer. So I think in many cases, two cohort management for our hard maple northern hardwood resource may be more valid in places with high deer browse. With all that said, there are some negatives. There are some species this works terrible for. There's kind of a magic point of about 20 square feet of basal area. At some point beyond that, there's enough shade thrown by those trees that they compromise the regeneration. And I will talk about a project that we did on that here shortly. You end up with slow growth of your mid-tolerant young stock. And what concerns me about that is that many of these trees set their merchandisable height in the Lake States. What is going to be merchandisable is logs, I should say, not pulp or bolts. By the time they're like 20 years old, they've already got to the height they're going that the merchantable logs are going to end at. That creates a challenge because if you get slow growth early, you are going to make that height shorter. You're going to have less merchandisable height. You may get bad growth form. While our conifers are geotrophic and grow against gravity, our hardwoods are phototrophic and they look for light flex to go to. And that creates a challenge. And finally, it's really hard to get the loggers to play this game right. If you go through and they look at anything smaller than 6 inches as something that should die on the pass through the site, they can actually do a lot of damage on a site. So this is a site that we set up. I'll talk more on this project in the future. But at this point, just look at it and see reserve trees. Pretty aggressive harvest. Push a site like this out 5 years. We now have a profound two-story canopy. And for many of our birds that are shrub nesters or ground nesters, which require shrubs for cover, this is an extremely vibrant condition. About 5 years is the starting point for a lot of those species in Wisconsin to start using. And about 15 years, which is what this photo shows, is where you get enough density of stocking that you start having birds winking out of these sites that they stop using them. So that 5 to 15-year harvest window is one of our most vibrant for birds in the Lake States. So if I look at some of the steps for implementation, so I'm going to show you a number of sites. So this is a harvest we did 2015, and it's a red pine stand with hardwood component. The background on this site is I cut this site in 2007 and 2008. So we did a thinning in there. We got light to the ground and we started getting hardwood regeneration in places where we could. We threw some pockets in places where the overstory was lower quality. In 2015, we came in and we released those pockets in some areas and created new pockets. This is after the 2015 harvest. You can already see the hardwood starting to move into the site. We just cut that one again. So I've had the luck of living in Wisconsin long enough that I'm on the third harvest on a lot of sites now. And I'm always uncomfortable saying systems work unless I have a long enough durability looking at them that I'm comfortable they will. By the time I've got to the third harvest, I'm pretty comfortable that this is a mechanism of managing these sites validly. This is the third entry on this site. This portion, we had a lot of the pine taken off the site. The pine was mature. I did keep some reserve trees. I kept oak reserve trees, particularly where they're there, and we're going to be reintroducing fire into the site. So this is a much more open crown condition. This on the other side of the road, same thing, was thinned in 2007, 2008 with pockets put in. Then 2015 harvest, this is shortly after the harvest, like a year or two later, you can see the openings that we have in the stand, let light to the ground. We just came back in 2025, cut it again. The hardwood that you see in the background on the right was from the pockets that we put in 2007. So they have now grown from 2007, were released in 2015, and were re-released in 2025. We added new pockets each time. By the next stand entry, the majority of the red pine and the overstory is going to be pulled out of these sites. We're going to keep a lot of the white pine, and we're going to have a range of species. And I want to keep emphasizing this. This is forestry where I have commercially sold this timber repeatedly. We are able to do this using commercial timber sales as the main mechanism of work on the site. That doesn't say we don't do other work, but we are actually doing the main amount of this harvest commercially with normal equipment in the Lake States. I'm including this photo because I kind of look at it as one of the best possible stand conditions for grouse. If you look in the background there, that's 15-year-old aspen coppice. You look in the foreground where my students are walking through, you have a couple of year old aspen coppice. In the middle ground left, you've got oak crop trees that are released, and on the right, you've got hemlock. You've got all the elements a habitat grouse need. You need a place for them to nest. Those oaks are really good nesting habitat for them. You need a foraging habitat for the chicks. The older aspen will work right now, but in the future, the stuff they're walking through will. And then for winter thermal cover, when you don't have snow cover, that hemlock is amazing. These settings, so this is an aspen coppice we did where we did reserves. You notice some oaks that are kept here. Get aspen, cut it at about 45 or a little bit years older. You can start sometimes as early as 30 on really rich sites, but 30 to 50 years, let's say, maybe 60. And the oaks aren't mature at that time. So aspen and oak commonly co-occur. And so we take the oaks, we cut the aspen around them, we end up releasing them. We hold them as long-term reserves. They're an economic value in the future. They also act as singing perches for things like golden-winged warbler, as example. And we push this through time, that aspen grows up. So 45 years plus 45 years, two rotations of aspen is 90 years, one rotation for oak. And it's a very valid system. It's actually pretty easy to carry out too. You can literally tell the loggers, cut the aspen, leave the oak over, let's say 5 inches along. It's actually a really, really simple system. Now, I have a bit of pyromaniac tendencies, so I will include roll of fire because I have to. And here's where I'm going to go. We got 3 videos here. I'm going to play all 3 of them. What you see on the left is a burn condition where you're actually burning in litter. There's relatively little other fuels on there besides litter. The intensity is relatively low, but the impact is pretty high. My students, if any of my former students are watching this, have a real strong tendency to say the only purpose of the first burn is to have the second burn. What you see in the next photo is the second burn. Second burn in that site, there's definitely changes in the fuel conditions that are making the site more pyrogenic because of what vegetation responded to the fire. And the one on the right, that's actually a release burn. We had a lot of red maple that was very dry conditions. And when we burnt that, a lot of the red maple got top killed. Some of the oak did, but some of the oak was established enough that it actually did not get top killed in the fire. It was a releasing effort for the oak. Results afterwards. You look on the left here, this is post fire. we're working on log likelihood of survival right now by size. So we're looking at the likelihood these trees are going to make it through a fire without top kill. And at some point above 4 or 5 inch in caliber, they're big enough that except if they're next to a jackpot of fuel, they tend to survive it. You have 70+% chance of survival. The photo on the right is regrowth after the burn we did. You notice the pretty little oak that's there. And then you notice the both hazelbrush and red maple that look pretty sad on the site. The oak is more fire resilient. So we've used fire in a number of settings for this. So this is some work I published back in 2013, where we looked at shelter wood with fire and scarification. And what I would say is we did shelter woods that had fire that were burned. We had ones that had scarification. We had ones that were just shelter wooded. Aggregate height of the oak seedlings was higher in both the fire and the scarification condition. A number of oak seedlings was higher. Plots containing oak seedlings was higher, but both fire and scarification worked similarly. So we had 5 sites that were burnt, 9 that were scarified, 3 that were just control units. And if you look at the oak, not to obsess on the full numbers here, but 27% of the regen in the burned sites was oak. 21% in the scarified sites was, and 7% in the ones without either. And when you look at the raw numbers on this, we got 4,000 oak ceilings on the burn sites and 2,400 on the scarified. There's the potential long term, even with those numbers, if those numbers aren't high enough to outcompete the more mesic species. After the overstory removal on the shelter wood, at some point in the future, we can send brush saw crews through to actually release our oak. That is a standard practice in a couple of counties in Wisconsin, and I've used it myself quite a bit. So I'd showed that oak reserve tree project earlier, and then I said I'll say a little bit more about it later. Well, this is the later. We had 5 sites we set up. We cut 4 of them in winter of 2007, 2008, and 1 in winter of 2008 and 2009. I had hoped they were all going to get cut in the same year, but that ain't how logging works. We have 12 plots in each one of the units, and for each one of those units, we have 4 treatments, 0% overstory, 15, 30, and 45. And we have 3 reps of each. This is kind of what the situation looks like. We have wide dispersed oak trees, we have the regeneration, and we grew those things out for 17 years, and we started implementing prescribed burns. And so we have so far burnt one of these units. We have fire line in around a second one. And through time, we're hoping to do repeated burns on these. And that's what it looked like after the first burn. So I'm going to take a graduate student's work and compress his entire thesis into one slide. I kind of feel bad for him, but that's how life goes. Fire increases the production of most kinds of forage, period. And sapling size increases once the saplings get bigger, their probability of survival increases. I have been accused of trying to micromanage burns, and it's true, I am. I kind of want to figure the timing where the trees I want to keep are less sensitive and the trees I want to top kill are more sensitive so that I can actually put the burn in at the right time. There has been some thought that if we burn 5 to 7 years after the cut, we'll top kill everybody and then they will have to come back. I think we can use that as one approach, but I also think there's the potential to start playing games of when the oak is big enough that it's now not as sensitive and we can actually run the fires through, particularly repeated fires, and change the timing. So I also had a graduate student, Amelia Scogan, who's working on the impacts on birds. And as you can probably tell already, I love birds. I think they're the coolest things ever. We have 2 categories of birds. The first are what I'm going to call the young and brushy birds. And these are the ones that were higher in the unburned unit. Golden-winged warbler, mourning warbler, chestnut-sided warbler, American redstart, blue-winged warbler are all ones that require brush. By comparison, we have my pyro birds, so my firebirds. Red-headed woodpecker numbers. They are extremely responsive to fire. Brown thrasher. Brown thrashers will sit in the trees while I'm burning a site and will be calling and will be actively foraging while there's still fire. They heavily utilize toasted insects. Gray catbirds, orioles, cedar waxwings, kingbirds, all were much more common in burn site. Looking at overall numbers, unburned sites had an abundance of 247 observations and richness of 34 species. The burn site, 296, so significantly more observations and representing 46 species. We had a 50% increase functionally in the number of species on the burn sites. Finishing this with a few case studies. So pine, I showed you this photo earlier. High structural diversity, a pretty balanced system as far as, pine is a pretty valuable species in this region. And it's what this looks like at the ground level. So these are two different sales. This one is done with drone footage. So we cut this with a logger by prescription. I gave them a georeference map, and the company that was doing the work was actually capable of carrying it out. And I'm going to show you the drone footage. When you look at this part, oh shoot. When you look at this part, one more time. When you look at this part, this looks like thinning, but maybe just a little more open, particularly on the edges. We have patch cuts within the site. And so the idea with this is through time, there's already an established understory of white pine. We're trying to build up a regeneration of white pine and oaks on this site so that the next stand entry, we can remove a lot of the overwood and you'll have multiple age groups. So that's immediately after harvest. They're actually still kind of working on that site when we did the drone video. This is one that it was cut in 2015, and this video was from 2022, I believe. So several years after cutting. This pocket is a patch cut. You have a little island of trees kept there. And we have pre-commercially thinned in here to favor the hardwood, so it's not just to see a white pine. And now the camera is facing north. It's almost north, almost north. Here it comes. And do you notice how this stand to the north has had trees removed to allow more light penetration? So the idea of this is we get more light penetration to the north, and the next cut, which we're hoping to do next year actually, we'll remove this chunk and start another age group on this site. Our target on this site is to try to have 5 different age classes of regeneration through time. Now finish with the oak case study. So this is our Schmeekley Reserve. We marked it back in, I believe, 2018. And then in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, we cut it. So we had a lot of students during 2020, during COVID, during that first fall, that were doing a lot of stuff that was online and they wanted physical activities to do. My silviculture class was 100% in person for the people who actually wanted to do it that way. Some chose online. And we had weekly chainsaw activities with my student groups out there. It was an opportunity for them to actually get out in a nice, safe environment and cut. We also had partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and we burnt some pretty good sized brush piles of residue. These sites grew enough that I could then go through and prescribe burn them. And so this is after the prescribed burn done on the site. This is our Zimmerman Savannah, which is another unit we worked on. And this was burnt on the 8th. On the 23rd, we already have adequate forage. The site's being used. Last photo. This is a private landowner that my business set up. This person is I'll say obsessive archery hunter for deer and also turkey hunter. And so I created him a heaven for deer. The center is a irregular shelterwood condition where on the right and on the left, I have red line stand boundaries where we're not going to enter those until 15 years or more in the future. So what this ends up with is good forage production, good bedding areas, amazing travel corridors. And this person 2 or 3 years out shot his quote best buck ever. And then the next year he shot his best buck ever. And then the next year his wife shot her best buck ever. And then there was a gap year. And then he shot something that is ridiculously enormous. Now he has not credited those deer to me, but frankly he should. Those were my deer. I made them. And that is the end of my slideshow.
That was great, Mike. Thanks. Jordan, you want to pop on and handle the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. That was fantastic. Very much enjoyed that. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll start with those. But if anyone has questions, feel free to keep entering them. We've got about 15 minutes. So the first question here, in your experience, what generally is the minimum acreage required to execute a commercial oak shelterwood harvest, assuming two entries in the Great Lakes region specifically?
Okay, everything is loaded when I say this. So if I look at, I don't want to set up a sale less than 200 cords. I used to, when I say 200 cords, I mean across product classes. However, just because I don't want to doesn't mean I don't. Everything is proximity. The smallest sales I've done have been 1 acre timber sales. I duct taped them together. So probably the one I think was the goofiest I did was we had a commercial entry on a bigger property, and we had seven stands within a development that had 2.5 acre lots. And we went stand after stand and thinned each one of those private parcels, literally 2.5 acre total, part of which is, the house and all that stuff. And I had a logger that was willing to do it. I set up another site. Actually, you've been on this site, Jordan. Set up another site where we had about a 20-acre cut, and three adjacent landowners went in on it. The smallest one probably generated, let's say, 30 or 40 cords out of the smallest one of the sales. And then the other ones, generated more because they were bigger. So the minimum is a loaded thing. I would say on a standalone sale, I try very hard not to sell anything less than 200 cords. Because if you start thinking to the math of it, if they have to bring the equipment to the site, that equipment's got about $1,000 moving cost. And if you got 200 cords, it's about $5 per cord just in cost to move the equipment to the site. That's about where the site can start bearing that cost. However, if I am like a quarter mile away from another sale that's happening, and I have a logger that works within a region, I can actually work with these smaller sales as long as they're not super touchy feely, and have it so that that logger can bring, if he has tired equipment with tires and not tracks, he can just crawl along the edge of the road legally. If he has tracks, he actually has to bring the machinery with transport. And as long as he's able to get there, it's not too inconvenient to do. I have set up some real small ones, but 200 cords is kind of what I consider the minimum break point, and more is better on that. Like if I can do 600 or 800, I would prefer that.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I was going to go in order here, but I think there's a couple questions that are good follow-ups to that. So next we have, what do you think you would have to change about your silviculture if pulpwood and small diameter log markets did not exist?
So what's been nice for a lot of the earlier ones of these is the first stand entry on a lot of these sites is done early enough that I do have just that pulp entry. I'm already changing my silviculture dramatically to deal with that because you can't sell a lot of your first entry conifers here very easily. They're planted too dense, and frankly, they never should have been put in that dense, but we could deal with it in the past. Now, that first stand entry is actually hard to do. I would say partly if you have government programs available that let you actually do some of those, they're NRCS programs that let you get into these sites non-commercially. That's the one portion of it. But the other part is we need to make it so that when we do our releases, the trees are big enough, they have commercial product, whatever that happens to be for the area. In some areas, it's pulp and it's easy to carry out. In other areas, you really can't sell anything till you're like bolt size. And by bolt size, I mean like scrag log size for the rest of the country. But here they call those hardwood bolts or railroad tie material or something similar. And in a lot of cases, we've missed our opportunity for getting the best bang for the buck. The other thing is these irregular shelterwood systems, I think, play really well in a condition where I don't have the pulp market for these sites because I'm already going in and doing significant patches where I'm removing significant volume out of the site. So I am getting enough volume in those areas that I can cover the cost of then the loggers doing stuff that they might not otherwise want to do, the non-commercial side of it.
Thank you. And that leads pretty well into this next question. This one's a little bit more specific, but certainly in a part of the state that is struggling with that pulp market. This person asks, I am having a commercial walnut harvest done in an overgrown oak savanna in southwestern Dane County, the Driftless region, in the next month or so, with the goal of oak restoration. It's only about 9 acres, and I've been using my goats to keep brush under control, multiflora rose, buckthorn, all the usual culprits. What should I be thinking about in the first growing season after the harvest? Just focusing on controlling invasives. There are lots of mature oaks and hickory.
So there's two elements to it. The first thing I would say is controlling the brush is a big one. Because after you get light to the ground, that's when bad stuff starts to happen. But the other element of it, it partly depends on what your vegetation is. Some of these sites, I'm always amazed when I see plants on sites that hate being in the shade, but they're still in the shade. I'll find lead plant that's this tall, and it's been there obviously 100 years because there's a 100-year-old overstory on it. And it's just sitting there and it's just getting enough light to survive. But that plant is probably 150 plus years old. One of the university properties, we have a west facing slope that has goat rue on it. It doesn't grow under a canopy. That's not its thing. And this plant, this patch, who knows how long it's been there? The overstory is 100, 150 years old. So it's been hanging out waiting for light. So you may have some relic plants on these sites that are either relic seed or actually like the individual plants that were there 150 years ago, that I would pay attention to those first. At some point, once a lot of the residue melts down, and by melts down, I mean decomposes, you're going to want to add fire. Goats are really good at keeping a lot of the brush down. Fire is also a pretty good choice for that. And so I guess I would say look at what comes up naturally with the new light and keep the brush down. And it's possible you may just be able to use fire to promote that. If not, you may want to come in and do additional work.
Well, next question also has to do with fire. In what seasons or times of year do you generally burn in these open canopy systems? I'm curious what burn timing is compatible with commercial timber sales and open canopy management in your region.
Is it wrong to just say yes? So we're expanding our growing season burns. And so we have a fire crew here with UWSP. So it's real convenient to do these. We do spring burns and we do fall burns because that's when semester is. But we've been expanding our growing season burns, and those are some of your most productive. That's where you actually get your real impact. So if I look at it, spring burns, in some years we can get the impact we want, but it's normally spring coming into early growing season when that actually happens. We can get some of the impact we want with these fall burns, and sometimes it works in the right falls. But growing season burns are amazing for biological impact. And it's one of those silly things where the people burning them, my pyros, I have a little pyro ecologist that I train, and Mike Tiller works here. He's our fire ecologist. They love these big flames. It gets them all excited. But the reality of this stuff is these growing season burns with flame heights that are like 3 to 6 inches are some of our absolutely most productive biologically. They go through, they go slow, they actually get vascular tissue at a sensitive time to a temperature where it'll actually top kill stuff, sometimes actually kill stuff. This photo behind me right here was a growing season burn, and we burnt that going into the evening and early night entirely so that we could take advantage of increased relative humidity. That was an incredible severity burn. We actually just we nailed so much of the red maple on that site. It was also a really fun burn to be on because we're going into increasing relative humidity, so a lot of the negative part of burns I don't have to worry about. And all my time on burns is spent worrying. So when I have one of these conditions where I don't have to pay attention, that's not the right way to say it, where I am benefited by the increasing relative humidity. So I'm not as worried and I can just enjoy the experience. And that was one of those sites. We had increasing relative humidity. We were going to have a good impact on the burn. It did a good job. And it was going into conditions where the moisture from the air was going to help us, the fun condition. So I'd say growing season is going to be some of your highest impacts.
And a quick follow-up question on those growing season burns. Can you provide any insight on the effect of growing season burns on forage specifically?
That's one that's kind of interesting. We are working on trying to get that. I have a current grad student, Luke Trudowitz, that's one of the things that he's looking at is this forage impacts. And my hope is to be able to answer that in the relatively near future. What I will tell you is it changes the time sequence on things. We get tons of available forage in spring. The timing where we actually need the better forage is actually later, but that's not how the Lake States works. If we're able to actually top kill a lot of this stuff and force it to resprout, we get higher quality forage at a time of year when our forage quality is not where it could be. So there's actually the sequencing of it. And if I start thinking like, nutrient demands on deer and things like that, those growing season burns conceptually will actually make us better late season forage. However, I'm saying that based on observation and not on data. But if you give me 2 years, I'll be saying it based on data. Does that kind of make sense? It's something we're poking around on, and if everything works out well, we'll actually have data on, but we don't know for sure yet. I'm basing it on opinion, functionally.
We got time for one more quick question, then we need to make sure we end out in time in case people have a hard stop at 1 and need to fill out the form for credit.
Absolutely. Thanks for keeping us on track, Kyle. I know we could all probably talk about this for the rest of the day. Let's see here. I'll ignore Tommy's because he can ask you later. Um, what is the ideal planting density, in your opinion, for traditional plantations, such as red pine, but also for hardwood species like oak and maple?
Hardwood's a loaded question, and that's goal dependent. And if I'm forced to put an absolute pinpoint on it, I'm going to say 600 trees per acre. And the reason I'm going to say that is at the time I need my first thinning, presupposing I'm doing a conventional row thinning, taking out every third row, leaving 2 rows. That means that those trees at the time that I need to thin them before they start really screwing each other up have a single 12-foot bolt in the butt, meaning that my first stand entry on that, I'm cutting a 12-foot bolt plus pulp above. That is an attractive enough sale for loggers that by bolt, I'm meaning a chip and saw. I need to be conscious that the rest of the country doesn't know what I'm saying when I say conifer bolt. And so that's kind of the timing and the density.
Wonderful. Great specific answer to a pretty difficult question. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Mike. That was awesome. Thanks to everyone for joining us today, and definitely for Mike Demchik for sharing his experience and expertise with us today. I think there's a lot of things we can take and apply from that. This is the QR code that will take you to the Microsoft form for getting credit for SAF. Also, again, if you just leave your browser open, it should go straight to the form. Mixed results on that one, though. So if you have problems, just email Tommy Gunn. It's just tgunn, GUNN at abcbirds.org, and we'll make sure you get your credit. Just a reminder, these webinars are going to be hosted on the first Friday of the months of February, May, August, and November. So our next Open Canopy webinar is going to be May 1st at noon Eastern. We don't have a speaker topic lined up yet. If you have ideas, shoot them to me or Jordan or Tommy, and we'll be happy to look into it. But we'll get you a speaker and a topic soon. And again, thank you to Mike Demchik. This was awesome, Mike. Very, very, very good.
And just Kyle, real quick too, this QR code as well as the link that will hopefully take everyone there also has questions just providing feedback from this webinar. So even if you aren't looking to get SAF credits, we'd greatly appreciate you taking the time to fill that out. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you much. And with that, we'll let everybody go.
Thank you.